Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 60th ever Highlight Haven interview. My name is Matthew Heiserman, and today we are joined by Locked On Panthers host Julian Council. Julian, it's great to have you on.
Yeah, Matthew, great to be here. Appreciate you reaching out and excited for the draft coming up next week.
Yeah, absolutely. Same here. And getting right into it, I just want to start by asking when you first knew that you wanted to work in the sports industry.
Wow. I want to say probably when I was a freshman in high school, I knew that's exactly what I wanted to do. I had narrowed down two schools I wanted to go to: Missouri because of their great journalism school, and also North Carolina, where I'm from. Sure, my parents went to UNC. So those two schools I was really looking at because I knew I wanted to be in sports journalism. I'd seen
Yeah.
plenty of people like Stuart Scott go to Carolina, and there's a number of Missouri alums as well. So that's kind of when I probably first pinpointed it. I ended up going to Elon, which is also a great journalism school, able to do some stuff early on when I got to school there. So probably when I was about 14, 15, right, my freshman year of high school is when I knew this is what I wanted to do.
Yeah, now you were a credentialed media member last season when Carolina played a game in Munich, Germany against the New York Giants on November 10th. Can you
Yeah.
just break down what it was like covering a Panthers game in a different country?
It was incredible. Just an amazing
Yeah.
moment. I mean, just being there and when the national anthem played, honestly, kind of had to hold back some tears because it was just so
Yeah.
cool to be in that scene, to see so many people from all across the world. It's not just people that came over from the States like me and all the other Panther fans and journalists and all of that, but also just the German fans, folks that were coming over from England, from all over, and just all united to watch an American football game. So it was an experience of a lifetime. I had actually never been to Europe, so that was my first time overseas. So getting to see Germany, getting to see Munich, going over to Austria for a day as well. It was something that I'll always cherish.
Yeah, I love to hear that. And you mentioned this right at the start. The NFL draft is obviously just over 1 week away, and the Panthers currently have the eighth overall pick in the 2025 NFL draft. Some of the names that have been floating around recently when it comes to that pick include Jalen Walker from Georgia, Michael Williams, also from Georgia, and Shamar Stewart from Texas A&M. That said, is there a specific player that you would like to see Carolina target at 8 with that pick?
I think Jalen Walker right now would be the pick. And that's been really the consensus when I've looked around at a lot of the mock drafts from people like Mel Kiper Jr., like Daniel
Yeah.
Jeremiah, Matt Miller, and Jordan Reed. And the thing you got to understand about these mocks, well, yeah, you and I, any of us can go up there, fire off the PFF mock draft machine or whatever mock draft machine. We might just be doing that, just guessing. A lot of times when you see, especially guys making those top 10 draft selections, those are from source material. So there's got to be something there. When there's smoke, there's fire. And I'm thinking that Jalen Walker, if Carolina stays at 8, which is a big if after what's gone on recently with the news in New Orleans, who's right behind Carolina, and they may need a quarterback if Derek Carr is not going to be able to play this season. I do think Jalen Walker would be that pick, the versatility he can provide to Carolina, where he can play that inside off ball linebacker. He can also play that edge rusher spot, which I think right now is what they should absolutely be looking for at 8, and be able to get one guy to do both things very
Yeah.
well, which he came out and said his pro day. A lot of guys are versatile, but not a lot of guys do multiple things well. I can do that. I love that confidence. I've talked to people down there in Athens about the leadership that he displayed through the course of his 3 seasons down there. And a lot of guys will go back, like a lot of the Georgia guys who were at Philadelphia, the Eagles, come back like Nakobe Dean. And I was told that they go down there, they're impressed by him, and they feel like he could immediately fit into their Super Bowl winning locker room. So I imagine Dave Canales, who's been all about culture, the foundation he wants to start here in Carolina, that's the guy that they absolutely would want to bring in. But I also throw out another name here. Donovan Ezeraku from Boston College has been tremendous in his career. He didn't have the greatest of years in 2023, but he was outstanding in 22 and in 2024. He has the kind of body type that you want and the production, having played in a P4 conference in the ACC. It might not be the SEC or the Big Ten, but there's still plenty of NFL talent that comes out of the ACC every year. That's another guy. If they want to just go pure edge rusher, I would rather have him
Yeah.
opposed to a guy like Michael Williams, who has not produced at that level, or Shamar Stewart, who also has not produced at that high level as Araku has.
Yeah, now there have also been some rumors that Carolina could potentially trade pick number 8. How realistic do you think a trade is, and what package might they be seeking if they do decide to trade that pick?
It's always hard to know what exactly a team's going to get because it depends
Yeah.
on when that trade is made. If
Mhm.
it's made before the draft, then it may not be that much. If it's made on draft night, I think teams tend to give up a little bit too much on when draft night actually
Mhm.
rolls around. As when the onus is, hey, there's 10 minutes on the clock for us to make a decision here whether we're going to put in that card to take a player or if we're going to trade it for you, and then you're going to put in that card. So that's when things can really be difficult for teams trying to trade with Carolina. So I do think there is a possibility that they do trade back, especially after the news, as I mentioned earlier, of Derek Carr with the shoulder in that situation playing down in New Orleans. And I already had felt that there was always a strong possibility that could be the case just because of when does Shador Sanders from Colorado go off the board? We know Cam Ward is going to go off the board at 1 to Tennessee Titans, but at 2, Cleveland, they brought back Joe Flacco. Who knows what's going to happen there with Deshaun Watson this season as he continues to recover from a second Achilles tear, but I don't think they're taking Shador. The Giants also in a win or you're out situation for Joe Shane and Brian Dable, the head coach and GM up there. Feels like they're probably going to stick with Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston, and they might want to
Yeah.
get the best player on the board opposed to Shador. Well, New England, they already have a quarterback. The Raiders, they have Geno Smith, so I don't think they're looking at Shador. There's a lot of teams that are sitting up there like Carolina that already have their guy. So if there's a team back there that likes him enough and knows that New Orleans may be desperate at 9 to try to get him, they may move up with Carolina, and that can get the Panthers move back. Now, it depends on how far they go because you don't want to go too far where you're not in range, get a player you think could be an impact player for you this upcoming season, which I do believe they should be looking for, and they probably do want in this first round of this year's draft. So I think the possibility of trading back is a lot stronger than it was prior to the card news. Don't really think that trading up would make that much sense, but if a guy like Abdul Carter is still sitting there, maybe when you get to 3, which is where the Giants are, and Joe Shane, Dan Morgan, they made that trade last year with Brian Burns. Their relationship dates back to their time under Brandon Beane up in Buffalo. That could be a possibility for Carolina where they're maybe not giving up too much. They want to go up there and get someone like Abdul Carter.
And you mentioned whether the Saints will or won't target potentially Sanders or a different quarterback with that pick. And I think, to be honest, at the end of the day, the player who's holding that up right now is Aaron Rodgers because it felt like
Yeah.
he was guaranteed to go to the Steelers. And then there's been breaking news, obviously, with the Derek Carr injury. Now it looks like he might go to New Orleans as well. So it really depends on who really takes a chance on Aaron Rodgers. And I think that plays a big role on what the Saints obviously do with the ninth overall pick. And,
Absolutely.
everyone's been focusing on what Carolina should do with the eighth overall pick. That said, are there any other specific players or general position groups that you would like to see them target past round 1 in the draft?
I do think looking at day 2, they're going to take a safety. Dan Morgan,
Yeah.
the Panthers GM, has come out and said, pretty much, and here's the thing about Dan. Last year when he took over the GM job, he said they needed to fix the offense. They need to get better on the offensive line. And what did they do? Their first moves they made in free agency were giving Robert Hunt a $100 million contract and also signing Damian Lewis to a $69 million contract on that first day. So they went out there and they fixed the offensive line. They went and traded for Deontay Johnson. No, it did not work out, but they showed the aggressiveness that they're willing to be in order to get a receiver to help out Bryce Young. So that was the objective last offseason. This offseason, he came out and said during the combine that they knew they had obvious needs on the defensive side of the ball. And what did they do? They went out there and spent a bunch of money and almost got Milton Williams. So clearly that's what they wanted to do, was to fix that defense, but they're still thin at safety. And Dan said this prior to the draft. I mean, a couple weeks ago, it's a pre-draft press conference with their executive vice president, Brant Tillis, that they're thin at safety. Right now, they have 3 safeties on the roster. Damani Richardson, who's second-year player, is UDFA from a year ago out of A&M, who started in the season. They got Jerron Merrick from Las Vegas in free agency, and they brought that back Nick Scott, who's going to be more of a special teamer than someone who they actually want to see out there playing defensive snaps this season. So 3 is obviously, as we know, not enough for this team, and they're going to have eventually 90 roster spots that they're going to whittle down to 53, really 69 counting the practice squad. I think that they're going to absolutely take a safety probably there in day 2. I've heard names like Xavier Watts could make some sense. Andrew Makuba could make sense for Carolina. So whether it be at 57 or 74, I can't imagine that they do not have a safety on this. They don't draft a rookie safety by the end of Friday night.
Yeah, now you actually just mentioned this name, so it's a nice little transition there. Just over a month ago, Carolina signed defensive end Tershawn Wharton to a 3-year, $45 million contract. What's your thoughts on this signing for the Panthers after Milton Williams ended up signing with the Patriots. It seemed like he was going to sign with the Panthers, ended up choosing the Patriots instead. How will Wharton kind of fill that gap that you lost with Williams?
Yeah, he's a good pass rusher. If you count the playoffs, he led the Chiefs in sacks a season ago. So
Mhm.
that ability up the middle and also can you kind of go on the edge as well, that can help Carolina as they have an issue as far as pass rusher goes. Now, when you bring in Wharton, you got Ashawn Robinson back, who actually did have his best year of his career as a pass rusher
Mhm.
from the interior defensive line spot. You have Clowney coming back for another season. They added Pat Jones a second as well in free agency, and he had a breakout year in Minnesota, and DJ Wonnum hopefully going to be fully healthy this season. Then you may have something there. I don't know necessarily they have a guy that a lot of teams are concerned about and someone who can be a game wrecker, but they have more options than they had a year
Mhm.
ago. So I think that's what Turk Wharton is going to do. And honestly, when they brought in Wharton, when they brought in Bobby Brown III as well as those two defensive tackles to kind of replace what they lost with Milton Williams, because Milton Williams was $26 million, which is more than what Derek Brown is getting per year. So you cannot justify
Yeah.
to one of your franchise cornerstones giving a player who's never been a Pro Bowler, who's never played more than 47% of the snaps in a
Mhm.
single season, more money than you, especially
Yeah.
when Derek Brown, when healthy, doesn't really come off the field. But they're able to use that money for Wharton, for Brown, for Jones. So you got three players. Maybe none of them are going to be as good as what Milton Williams would have been for Carolina and may be for New England, but they got three guys and they were able to fill the needs that they had instead of spending it all on one player. So I look at the guys they brought in, they're going to really rotate just around Derek Brown. And I think the versatility that you now have Wharton as more of an interior pass rusher and in Brown as a guy who can be a run stopper, that Carolina's defensive line, especially the interior, is going to be much better than what it was a year ago when they had all the injuries. They didn't have Derek Brown. They had some of the issues just talent wise there on the interior.
Yeah, now another move that the Panthers made during free agency was signing Trevon Merrick to a 3-year deal worth $51 million. What will Merrick's impact look like in 2025, coming off his first season in the league with over 100 tackles?
I would expect that possibly to be a repeat this year, as he's going to be someone that they're going to want to play more up in the box this upcoming
Yeah.
season. And he's been a really good run defender. And that was obviously something Carolina wanted to fix after they gave up 3,000 yards last year, the
Mhm.
worst rush defense in the NFL, the worst rush defense in franchise history as well. Like that had to be stopped. And bringing in Bobby Brown III was a part of that, getting back Derek Brown, which a team like Carolina is going to look at as a free agent addition, even if he was somebody already under contract for a long-term deal. And now Mary can be that. He can bring that kind of physicality, which they really lacked last year. Nick Scott, who I mentioned before, really struggled tackling. I go back to a game in week 4 against Cincinnati right before the half. The Bengals decide they're not going to kick a field goal. They're going to throw it out to the flat to Jamar Chase, which is never really a bad idea, but he was dead to right. And Nick Scott can't
Yeah.
make the tackle. Chase scores, and that's kind of the difference in the game. Of course, some other turnovers later on, but you got to be able to make those kind of plays. Jordan Fuller never really lived up to what they wanted him to be. Xavier Woods had an okay season after being borderline a top 10 safety the year prior in 2023. So they needed to bring in somebody who could be a sure tackler, could be better in coverage, and that's what I think they're going to get out of Merrick. At least that's the hope of what they're getting out of Merrick this upcoming season and beyond.
And then the Panthers also signed running back Rico Dowdle to a 1-year deal
Yeah.
worth under $3 million, I believe 2.75. However, it has the possibility to get up to over $6 million, I believe. What will the distribution look like between Chuba Hubbard and Rico Dowdle next season? Two running backs who are both coming off seasons with over 1,000 rushing yards and 1,300 scrimmage yards.
Yeah, Chuba's going to be the guy. Don't
Mhm.
get it twisted at all. He is because they paid him last year.
Yeah.
And how often do you see a guy get paid and then come out that very next game, which was the game in Munich we talked about earlier,
Mhm.
and have the best day of your career? Like, I don't think that
Mhm.
really
Yeah.
happens. And I mean, a lot of times these guys get paid in March. So it's not like it's always an in season extension and then you're playing that week. But man, I think he's going to still be the guy. The hope is it can be kind of a smash and dash double trouble part 2, which they used to have here in Carolina with D'Angelo Williams and Jonathan Stewart. And the hope was that that's what they were going to get when they drafted Jonathan Brooks. But he tore his ACL for the second time in 13 months back in November, and he's probably not going to factor in at all this season. And so bringing in Dowdle, who is from North Carolina, from Asheville, played down at the University of South Carolina, they now have two guys who you can count on. And I think Dowdle's more of a guy who can catch the ball at the backfield with more consistency than what you've been able to get out of Hubbard in his career here in Carolina. I do think it's going to be, I don't know if it's going to be like 60-40, but certainly like Rico will get his carries. Chuba's going to get his carries for them also. And Dave Canales talked about last year when he came here that they wanted to be stubborn about running the football. And we did not really see that last season. But now with the entirety of the offensive line coming back, you add a second 1,000-yard rushing running back in that backfield. And I do have a question about the receiver. This can take pressure off of Bryce Young. And if he's handing the ball off 30, 35 times a game, like that's typically a good thing because it means that you're controlling the game clock, controlling the line of scrimmage, and you're having success running the ball. So I do think that both of those guys are going to get their touches. I just still would say that Chuba Hubbard absolutely is the dude in the backfield for Carolina at that running back spot.
Yeah, now the Panthers also signed free agents including Austin Corbett, Bobby Brown III, and Nick Scott, just to name a few. Are there any under the radar free agent signings that Carolina made that you think could make a big impact for them in 2025 that we haven't really touched on yet?
Well, the Corbett one is important because he was supposed to be the center for them last year, and he's dealt with injuries. His first year in Carolina, played in every single snap of the season until tearing his ACL in Week 18 in that win against New Orleans, and then he was not able to come back until Week 6 of that disastrous 2023 season before tearing his meniscus. So he played 4 games, and in last year was finally healthy, was playing well, and then tears his bicep, and then he's out for the final 12 games of the season a year ago. So they brought him back because they still want to have that veteran presence there at center, but he's going to have to compete for the job of Cade Mays, who was someone who they had drafted a couple years ago. They cut him. They re-signed him off the Giants practice squad, and he held his own against Dexter Lawrence in Munich, back home after the bye week against Chris Jones. And now he's in a spot where maybe he's going to be the guy. So if there's anything underrated, that's a restricted free agent who they brought back. I look at Cade Mays, who could end up being the answer at center for a long term because they have, since they moved on from Ryan Khalil, Carolina has gone from Matt Paradis, who dealt with injuries. They went to Bradley Bozeman, who worked out for a year. Then it didn't work out great when they had all the injuries. Next him at those guard spots in 2023 to then trying out Corbett. Now with Mays, maybe they can finally have some long-term consistency there at that center spot. So that would be the one that I don't think a lot of people maybe are looking at. That would be kind of the underrated or under the radar move that they made this offseason.
Now, a lot of the major free agents have already received new contracts. However, there are still a few players looming in free agency. Amari Cooper, Rasul Douglas, Asante Samuel. Are there any remaining free agents or positions that you think Carolina still needs to address?
Yeah, I wonder. Julian Blackman, I'm like doing a quick Google search right now to see if he's still a free agent, which I believe he is. That's someone that Carolina, along with Marcus Williams, it's probably been a month now. That's how fast time travels. Yeah, it's been like 3 weeks. They brought those guys in for visits. So I would think that, as I talked about, like I said earlier, I would be surprised if they don't take a rookie there by the end of Friday night and day 2 of the draft. I'd also be surprised if they don't have like a veteran like Blackman who would fit pretty nicely there with Merrick and whoever they might bring in the draft. So I would think that he's probably the guy to look at, but it would be safety. That would be the position. Receiver at this point, they feel pretty good about what they have in Xavier Legette with Adam Thielen coming back, Jalen Coker, even David Morris. The top 4 are back from a season ago, and they were productive. Now, was it like high-level production? Not necessarily, but you'd expect there would be that second-year leap from Legette, especially, and also from Coker, and then Thielen, as long as he can stay healthy, he's probably going to be a pretty solid option for Bryce Young again this season, which is probably his last in Carolina, maybe his last of his career. So I don't think receiver would be the spot, but I would certainly think safety and probably a guy like Julian Blackman is someone that they'd be looking at if they want to bring somebody in either prior to the draft or probably more likely at this point post-draft.
The Panthers also made a lot of changes to their coaching staff recently, hiring Ronaldo Hill as the secondary coach, AC Carter as the outside linebackers coach, Keyshawn Coleman as the offensive assistant, and Kevin Peterson as the defensive assistant. A lot of moves. What changes can we expect to see with all of these new coaches at the helm in 2025?
I don't think much is going to change in terms of what the scheme's going to be because it's still a Jero Vero's defense. You look at some of these guys, I mean, they've come from Los Angeles, where Jero Vero was before he went to Denver for that one season under Nathaniel Hackett, his best friend as the DC, before coming to Carolina after not getting the head coaching job when he interviewed for it. So it's going to be the same 3-4 scheme. I'm very curious to see how blitz heavy they're going to be this season after last year to try to manufacture any sort of pass rush. That's what they had to do, and they weren't that successful at doing that even when they blitz. So I am curious. And yeah, I mean, the secondary really struggled last year. The linebacker play could be better, certainly, especially on the edge. So we'll see. I do think they have more options. But it's kind of a wait and see at this point in time what this defense is going to be. It's going to be a make or break season for Jero Vera. A lot of fans felt like he should have been fired, but if they were listening closely, which a lot of them weren't, Dave Canales kept saying he didn't have a problem with the scheme. If the problem's not the scheme, then what's the problem? Well, the problem's the players. And he's not going to just directly say the players are the problem. But clearly, if you watched the team last year, you saw the talent level wasn't that great. But it is a results-oriented business. It is a meritocracy, and I don't know how much merit that Jero Vera has after looking over or coordinating two of the worst defenses in franchise history to be able to play out the final year of his contract. But the owner, David Tepper, is also tired of paying guys dead money. He's still paying Matt Rule. He's still paying Frank Reich and probably a lot of other guys money from their contracts when they were here in Carolina, either as head coaches or assistants. So I am very interested and not quite sure what I'm going to see from this defense upcoming here in 2025.
Yeah, and you obviously hear about the guys like Chuba Hubbard, JC Horn, but you're the reporter. You know obviously a lot more about some of the underappreciated, underrated guys on the squad. Who do you think could take a big step for the Panthers, maybe have a breakout year for them this upcoming season?
That's a great question. I think JT Sanders, the tight end that
Oh
Carolina
yeah.
drafted in the fourth round a year ago from Texas, could be that guy. He was starting to come around last year because early on they didn't have Tommy Trimble was banged up. Ian Thomas, who is now gone, and fans are rejoicing over that. He's no longer here. But those are two veteran presences that they had that weren't available throughout preseason and training camp. So JT Sanders and Jordan Matthews, who used to play receiver, now tight end still here in Carolina, they had to start week one. And it did not go well for the Panthers overall, but also did not really go well for JT Sanders, who was the lowest graded player according to PFF. And that was the case in the first couple of weeks of the season. And then you get past the midpoint, and then that's when you start to really see him break out. And in that first half against the Chiefs, he was outstanding until he falls awkwardly on his neck, gets carted off. Fortunately, it wasn't anything that serious. He's able to come back after missing the next week, but then just wasn't really a part of the game plan. Or maybe he just wasn't mentally there after going through. I'm sure it had to have been like a very frightening, traumatic experience, but still, I thought we were going to see more of him at the end of the year. So I think this year, of a full off season, with another year of understanding how to play tight end at this level, and the opportunity that is presented to him as it's just him and Trimble coming back, I do think that maybe he can be that breakout guy because we talk about the receivers. Well, he's a part of that as he is a pass catching tight end. And in his draft class 2024, it was Brock Bowers and then him as far as the top two pass catchers at that position in college those 2 seasons. So I do think that he could be the breakout player and could be that jump ball red zone threat that Carolina fans are looking at and wondering, do they have it? That may be him.
And towards the end of last season, we saw a lot of progression from Bryce Young, obviously. Nonetheless, he's had a very inconsistent start to his career,
Yeah.
including his first season, and then obviously him getting benched at the start of his sophomore campaign. And you have to keep in mind, he only got that second chance most likely last season because of an Andy Dalton car accident. So, you don't really know what his opportunity would have necessarily looked like last season.
Mhm.
What can we expect to see from Young this upcoming season? Entering his third year in the league, will he finally make that jump to become a more consistent quarterback? Or are we going to kind of see that same Young that we saw at the start of his second season during his first season in the league?
Yeah, I sure hope we never see what we saw from Bryce in weeks 1 and weeks 2. And that was, I mean, that was just shocking to me. I
Mhm.
was there throughout training camp, and especially the joint practice against the Jets. And now the Jets turned out to not be a good football team, which, okay, whatever. But defensively, they do have some dudes there.
Mhm.
And I thought Bryce played really well in that joint practice. And you get a lot more out of those, especially for the first team, than you necessarily do from the preseason games. And there was a lot of people that were not happy with Dave Canales for not playing the starters more, especially when they came out and they looked the way that they looked to start the
Mhm.
season. But
Yeah.
really, the problem was Bryce. So I can't imagine him going back and looking like that. And I don't expect him to look like he looked week 18, where I believe he had 5 touchdowns in an overtime win against Atlanta. And you got people always talk about he was going to be the Steph Curry of the quarterback position. Well, you got that Steph Curry, the throw, turn around, put his arms up, calling a touchdown before he even gets to the ball to Tommy Trimble. Like that is what he can be. But the consistency I think he showed over the last 7 or 9 or 8 games of the season, where he was like a top 7 quarterback according to PFF, like that's what you're hoping he can be. I don't know if he's going to be a top 10 quarterback through a full season. If he can be in that top 12, that's a good progression for Carolina. And in this division in NFC South, that may be enough for the Panthers to be right there in contention. So that is one that is going to be very interesting to see play out this year,
Yeah.
as it is an important year, as it's going to be year 3. And typically in these situations, like you really want to be in that spot with your quarterbacks where you feel like you're close to the playoffs in their 3rd season. It's not always that linear. We see people like C.J. Stroud, who a lot of people have looked and wondered what if he had come to Carolina, how things would have played out. They've gone the last 2 seasons, and probably the favorites go back again this year in Houston, but not every circumstance is the same. I do think that Bryce has shown that he is competent and capable. It's just like you said, that consistency. Can he show it through the course of a full 17-game regular season schedule? Well, we'll see. And if he can, then that's going to lead Carolina to make a big decision next offseason of whether to exercise 50-year option or give him a long-term extension.
Mhm. And the Panthers finished last year 5-12 record, earned the 8th pick in the draft. I know this is a broad question and a lot can change until
Yeah.
then, but what are realistic expectations for this team this upcoming season?
If you look at the final 9 games, and that's when Bryce had come back in the lineup, they went 4-5.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
that if they can be right around that 8, maybe 9 win total, I don't know. And you get, like you mentioned, like it's broad. I got to see what they do in the draft to completely know. And
Mhm.
looking around the division, I'm still leaning towards like Tampa being the top team. New
Yeah.
Orleans, the card news aside, I didn't really look at them as a threat. Atlanta, I do love what Michael Penix Jr. is
Yeah.
going to be in this league. So I do think that they'll probably be fine. And it's going to be pretty bit like make or break year also for Raheem Morris down there after how
Mhm.
things played out for the Falcons in that season a year ago. So if they can get to the 8-win total, which is 3 wins better, if you go from 2 to 5 to 8 and you're right there, like that may be enough to get you in. And who knows, the NFC, it's not like the AFC where there's just all these dominant quarterbacks. And if you don't win 10, 11 games, you have no shot at the wild card. It may be enough for the NFC wild card, maybe enough for the division title. So I think right now, if they can be right there around that 8-win total, which I know Panther fans aren't going to want to necessarily listen to and hear, but there's still a lot of question marks about whether this team can be good enough. And if people don't think that DC should have the job and the same DC's coming back, then how can you also believe that this will be a playoff team? Like those two things don't necessarily align as far as like logic goes, but still, I mean, I guess both could be true. Who knows? But 8 wins, I think right now that would be kind of the high watermark and like where you would want to see this team, because that would be a natural progression for Dave Canales in the 2nd year.
And kind of going back to your time as a reporter, throughout your time covering the Panthers, has there been a specific player that you would consider to be the funniest or most memorable favorite player that you've gotten to cover?
I think Brian Burns was always someone who was always
Mhm.
candid, and I know they always have these some media award that they give out every year to
Mhm.
a player that is willing to answer questions. Because I mean, I know they're contractually obligated, but not everybody takes it the same. And I thought Burns was really a likable guy. Was someone who came in, did everything you asked of him to do, became a leader, and was good off the field as far as in the community as well. So that probably be the one I'd point to.
Now, I do have one final question to ask before we wrap things
Yeah.
up. If there was one piece of advice you would give to an aspiring sports broadcaster or journalist like me, what would it be?
I would tell you to never turn down an opportunity. That was something I was told early on. When I was interning at a local ESPN radio station here in town, I was told to say yes to every opportunity. That means that you're having to work on the weekends. That means you're working overnights. So be it. You know, you got to make sacrifices socially to be able to get to where you want to be professionally. So I would always tell you to never turn down an opportunity, and that will lead you, I think, in the right direction.
Yeah, I really appreciate that advice, and I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your Monday morning to
Of
be
course.
here. Is there anything else you want to say to the people watching before we wrap things up?
Just I think it's gonna be a very interesting season for Carolina. Big draft coming up, obviously, but I do think that the bulk of the work that they've done is already been done as far as bringing in some of these key free agent veterans there on the defensive side of the ball. So I think Bryce Young could be a fun player to watch, and Carolina maybe sneaks up and wins the South this year. So I think it should be a fun team, and I really appreciate you, Matthew, and all you're doing. And man, you're doing a lot more than a lot of us have did when we were your age. So I don't know how much advice you need from me or anyone else. You're clearly on the right path.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Again, big thanks to Julian Council for being the 60th ever Highlight Haven interview guest. And as always, we will see you next time.